Okay, so March Madness, it's here.
Mhm.
And, whether you're someone whose bracket is like already a work of art or you're just starting out and just kind of seeing what might happen, you're probably thinking about it right now.
Yeah, definitely. Everyone's got March Madness on the brain right now.
That's right. So today, we are not just filling in those little bubbles.
Mm,
We are going deep on how to actually build a bracket that is strategic and not just, random guesses.
that's right.
We're going to give you the information you need to not just be a casual fan, but to really understand how this tournament works.
We really want you to have a leg up on everyone else in your pool.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to start with the basics and then get into some really interesting ideas and strategies and things that you might not have thought about before.
Exactly, and maybe even have a little fun along the way, right?
Yeah, for sure. And, hopefully by the end of this, you'll be the one to beat.
Definitely. So let's start with the basics. Like, what exactly is bracketology? I mean, we hear that word thrown around a lot this time of year.
Yeah, you hear it everywhere. So basically, bracketology, it's all about trying to predict, who's going to win each game in the NCAA men's basketball tournament.
The whole thing, from the very first tip-off to the final buzzer.
Yeah, like you're trying to say, okay, this team's going to beat this team, and then this team's going to beat that team, and so on, all the way to the
But we
championship.
got to figure out, like, which teams are even going to make it into the tournament in the first place, right?
Oh, yeah, that's a whole other thing, right?
68 teams?
68 teams, exactly.
Then they're divided into 4 regions.
Right, and they get ranked or seeded
Yeah.
within their region from 1 to 16,
One being the best team in theory,
the top dog
the favorite.
in that region.
Yeah.
And then it goes all the way down to 16.
Right. And so the selection committee, they have to figure out who gets those spots.
So you've got like automatic bids for teams that win their conference tournaments.
Right. Like if you win the Big Ten tournament, you're automatically in.
You're in, and then you've got the at-large bids.
Which is where things can get really interesting and sometimes controversial.
Yeah, because they're looking at things like a team's record, how tough their schedule was.
And a bunch of other factors, too.
Right, trying to compare teams from all these different conferences and figure out, who really deserves to be in.
It's a tough job, but somebody's got to do it.
So once you've got all the teams and they're seated in their regions, how does that actually play out in the bracket?
So the seeding determines the matchups in the first round.
Right. So the number 1 seed in each region, they play the 16 seed,
The 2 seed plays the 15 seed.
and so on down the line.
So, in theory, the higher seeds should have an easier time in those early rounds.
Because they're playing, theoretically weaker teams.
Right, exactly.
But that's not always how it goes, is it?
Nope, that's where the upsets come in, and that's what makes March Madness so much fun.
That's right. Because you never really know for sure.
So speaking of not knowing for sure, what are the chances of actually getting every single pick right in your bracket?
The elusive perfect bracket.
Like, does anyone actually ever do that?
Well, the odds are definitely not in your favor. Let's put it that way.
How bad are we talking?
I mean, depending on, how you do the math, it's somewhere around 1 in 9.2 quintillion.
Quintillion? That's like a number I don't even know how to say.
I know it's a 9 with 18 zeros after it,
Oh, wow. So basically impossible.
basically. Yeah.
But, even though getting a perfect bracket is practically a dream, it's still fun to try, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I think even more than that, like trying to figure out how the tournament might unfold.
Yeah.
It actually makes you a more engaged fan.
For sure, because you're not just watching the games. You're really thinking about the teams, their strengths, their weaknesses, their matchups.
Right. You start to understand, the dynamics of the tournament.
So even if you don't get every pick right, you're still getting so much more out of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So how do we make our brackets better? How do we go beyond just, random guessing and actually make informed decisions?
Okay, so one of the most fundamental things to keep in mind is something called respecting the seed.
Respecting the seed.
Yeah, so basically, especially in those early rounds, those top teams, the 1s, the 2s, the 3s, the 4s, they tend to do really well.
Yeah, they usually make it past those first couple of rounds.
Right, because their ranking usually means that they've had a really strong season.
They've got more talent. They've played a tougher schedule.
They've kind of earned that top spot.
Right. And so in those early matchups, they often have the edge.
Yeah, if you look at the teams seeded 1 through 3 that also are in the top 10 nationally for both offense and defense.
So you're talking about like how many points they score per possession.
Right. Offensive efficiency. And then how well they prevent the other team from scoring defensive efficiency.
Got it. So if they're in the top 10 for both of those.
Those teams, they make it past the Sweet 16 like 80% of the time.
Wow. That's a pretty good track record.
Yeah, so respecting those top seeds, especially early on, is a good starting point.
Okay, that makes sense. But we all know that March Madness is famous for its upsets.
Right, the Cinderella stories.
So where do we typically see those lower-seeded teams, making those surprising runs?
So there's this really interesting trend with the 12 seed versus the 5 seed matchup.
Oh, yeah, the classic 12-5 upset.
Exactly. It happens a lot more often than you might think.
Why is that?
Well, there are a few reasons. Sometimes the 5 seed, they might have had a slightly easier schedule during the regular season.
So they haven't been as battle-tested.
Right. Or maybe they're dealing with some injuries that haven't fully healed.
And those injuries might not be totally reflected in their seeding.
Right. On the other hand, that 12 seed, they've probably had to fight really hard to get into the tournament.
They've come out of a tough conference, maybe had to win a play-in game,
They might have a lot of momentum coming in.
and something to prove.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when you see that 12-5 matchup, it's definitely worth considering the potential for an upset.
Okay, so you're not saying we should pick every 12 seed to beat a 5 seed.
No, you have to be selective about it. You have to look a little deeper.
What should we be looking for specifically?
So think about the 12 seeds' recent performance. Are they on a winning streak? Have they been playing really well?
Like, how strong was their conference?
Yeah.
Did they face a lot of tough competition?
And do they have like a standout player, someone who can really take over a game?
Okay, so someone who can make a big difference in those crucial moments.
Right. And then on the flip side, you want to look at the 5 seed for any potential weaknesses.
So, like, have they struggled against certain types of teams?
Like maybe they have trouble with teams that play really good defense or teams that like to push the pace.
And if the 12 seed happens to be one of those types of teams,
Then that could be a sign that an upset is brewing.
so it's all about finding those matchups where the 12 seed has a good chance to exploit the 5 seed's weaknesses.
Exactly. You're looking for that clash of styles and a 12 seed that's peaking at the right time.
Okay, so we've got our 12-5 upsets, but we don't want to go overboard with those, right?
No, you don't want to pick all the lower seeds to win in those early rounds.
Because statistically, that's just not very likely.
But at the same time, if you only pick the higher seeds, you're going to end up with a bracket that looks just like everyone else's.
Then that's not going to help you win your pool.
So it's about finding that balance between those safe picks and those calculated risks.
So how do we figure out which risks are worth taking? How do we make those more nuanced decisions?
So this is where you start getting into the world of team statistics.
How the numbers?
The numbers, yeah. So you want to look at things like offensive efficiency and defensive efficiency.
Which we talked about earlier.
Right, but you can also look at strength of schedule.
So, like, did a team play a bunch of cupcakes, or did they actually face some really tough opponents?
And another important factor is player experience.
Like, how many seniors or juniors do they have?
Because those guys have been there before, they've played in big games, they know how to handle the pressure.
Okay, so experience matters.
It can make a huge difference.
So where can our listeners find all of this great statistical information?
Well, there are some really good websites out there.
Like what?
So there's a site called KenPom, KenPom.com.
KenPom. Okay.
Yeah, it's like a gold mine for advanced basketball stats. They have all these efficiency ratings and stuff.
Cool. And then there's also ESPN's Basketball Power Index, or BPI.
BPI, okay.
And then the NCAA also has their own ranking system called the Net Rankings.
Net Rankings, got it. So those are all good resources for digging into the data.
Yeah, and they use slightly different methods, so it's helpful to look at a few of them to get a well-rounded picture.
Okay, so beyond just the numbers, are there any other things we should be paying attention to? Like maybe some news stories or, things happening off the court?
Oh, definitely keep an eye out for late-season developments.
Like what?
So if a key player gets injured, that can obviously have a huge impact on a team's chances.
Especially if it's like their star player.
Right. But on the flip side, if a team's playing really well going into the tournament, like if they win their conference tournament convincingly, they've got that momentum.
Yeah, they're on a roll, and that can carry over into the NCAA tournament.
So momentum matters too.
It definitely can.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of, really useful strategies. But at the end of the day, sometimes you just have a gut feeling about a team.
Right, like you just think they're going to do well.
So how much weight should we give to those gut feelings?
There's nothing wrong with letting your intuition guide you a little bit, especially in those early rounds.
Like maybe you've always liked a certain coach, or you just think a team's style of play is really fun to watch.
But when you're getting into those later rounds and the games that really matter for your pool standings, you probably want to lean more on the data and the analysis.
So use your head more than your heart.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the early rounds and the upsets, but what about the teams that tend to go deeper in the tournament?
the ones that make it to the Sweet 16 and beyond.
Yeah, what sets those teams apart?
So when you're looking at the contenders, a few things really stand out. Coaching experience is huge.
Like coaches who've been there before and know how to handle the pressure.
Exactly. Those coaches, they know how to make adjustments during the game. They know how to keep their players focused.
And then, of course, you need to have some really talented players.
Those star players who can score consistently and step up when it matters most.
Right, the difference makers.
And maybe even more important than that, you need a strong defense.
Defense wins championships, as they say.
Because in the tournament, sometimes your offense isn't going to be clicking.
You're going to have off nights.
But if you can rely on your defense to keep you in the game, you've always got a chance.
So those are the hallmarks of a deep-run team, good coaching, star players, and a solid defense.
Exactly.
Okay, and then you've got the Cinderella stories, those mid-major teams that come out of nowhere and make a run.
Yeah, like St. Peter's a couple of years ago.
That was incredible.
So is there any way to predict who those Cinderella teams are going to be?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
It's tough, but there are a few things to look for. So often these teams, they've dominated their own conferences.
They've been beating up on the competition.
Right. They've got a really high offensive efficiency, and they're playing with a lot of confidence.
They know this is their chance to shine on the big stage.
Exactly. And sometimes they might have a unique playing style, something that the bigger schools aren't used to facing.
Something that throws them off their game.
Right. And of course, there's always an element of luck involved.
Like getting a favorable draw on the bracket.
Yeah, facing teams that maybe aren't playing their best.
So it's a combination of talent coaching and a little bit of luck.
That's the Cinderella recipe.
So when we're filling out our brackets, should we be thinking differently if we're trying to win our office pool versus trying to get a perfect bracket?
Yeah, absolutely. Those are two very different goals.
So if you're just trying to win your pool, especially if it's a big pool, you might need to take some more risks.
You need to differentiate your bracket from everyone else's.
So if everyone is picking the same 4 teams to make the Final Four,
you might want to pick a different Final Four.
Or you might need to correctly predict some upsets in the early rounds.
Because that's where you can really gain some ground on your opponents.
But if you're going for the perfect bracket,
then you're all about maximizing your chances of getting each individual game right.
So you're probably going to stick with those higher seeds more often.
Because statistically, they're more likely to win.
So it's about playing the odds.
Exactly.
So in a big pool, it might be a good idea to pick a Final Four team that's maybe a little bit under the radar.
A team that you've done your research on and you think they have a chance to make a run.
But most people aren't picking them.
Right. So if they do make it to the Final Four, that's a huge advantage for you.
Okay, so we've talked about what to do now. Let's talk about what not to do. What are some of the most common mistakes people make when filling out their brackets?
So one of the biggest mistakes is picking too many upsets.
Ah, the Cinderella overload.
It's easy to get caught up in the excitement and think that every lower seed is going to win.
Especially after you see a couple of upsets happen in the first round.
Right, but statistically, most of those underdogs are going to lose eventually.
And if you pick too many upsets early on,
you're going to be left with very few higher seeds in those later rounds.
And your bracket is going to be busted.
So be selective about your upsets. Choose them wisely.
Okay, what's another common mistake?
Another one is not paying enough attention to the matchups.
So you're saying it's not just about picking the better team overall.
Right. You have to think about how the teams match up against each other.
Like their styles of play.
Exactly. So, for example, if you have a team that's really good offensively but not so good defensively.
And they're playing against a team that's known for their tough defense.
That could be a recipe for an upset even if the offensive team is the higher seed.
So you have to look beyond just the seed number.
And really analyze those matchups.
Okay, good advice. What else?
Okay, this is an important one. Don't make last-minute changes to your bracket.
Like right before the deadline.
Yeah, because often those changes are based on emotion or, what someone else is telling you.
Not on your own research and analysis.
So trust your gut and stick with your original picks.
Resist the urge to second-guess yourself.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about strategy and trying to win, but let's not forget that March Madness is supposed to be fun.
It's a celebration of college basketball.
So are there any other ways we can engage with the tournament besides just filling out a traditional bracket?
Oh, definitely. There are all sorts of fun and creative things you can do.
Like what?
So one popular one is Mascot Madness.
Mascot madness. I like that.
Yeah, it's where you pit the team mascots against each other in these imaginary battles.
Like who would win in a fight, the Duke Blue Devil or the Gonzaga Bulldog?
Exactly. It's a fun way to get everyone involved, even people who don't follow college basketball that closely.
Okay, I mean, what else?
You could also do a uniform bracket.
Uniform bracket. So we're judging the teams based on their fashion sense.
Exactly. You pick which team has the best looking uniforms, and you advance them through the bracket.
That's a good one. And then there's the food bracket.
Ah, yes, the food bracket. So you pair each team with a food from their state or region.
Like Carolina barbecue for North Carolina.
Exactly. And then you decide which food is better, and you advance that team.
Okay, that's my favorite one. I'm definitely doing that.
And of course, don't forget about friendly wagers.
Oh yeah, like with your friends or coworkers.
It doesn't have to be a lot of money.
Just something to make it a little more interesting.
Bragging rights for the year.
Exactly.
Or maybe the loser has to buy lunch.
Perfect.
Just a little something to add to the fun.
Okay, so we've covered a ton of ground today.
From the basics of bracketology to some advanced strategies and even some fun alternative ways to enjoy the tournament.
So let's quickly recap the key takeaways for our listeners.
So number one, respect those higher seeds, especially in the early rounds. But be strategic about picking your 12-5 upsets. Look for matchups where the 12 seed has a real chance.
Number 2, use those team metrics like offensive efficiencies, defensive efficiencies, strength of schedule, player experience. Really dig into the data.
Number 3, consider those late season developments like injuries and momentum. They can make a big difference.
Number 4, be aware of the potential for Cinderella runs, but don't go crazy picking upsets.
Number 5, know your goal. Are you trying to win your pool or get a perfect bracket that will shape your strategy?
Number 6, avoid those common mistakes like picking too many upsets or making last-minute changes.
And number 7, most importantly, have fun with it. Try out some of those alternative brackets. Make some friendly wagers. Enjoy the madness.
I love it. So as you're making your final picks, think about which of these strategies resonates with you.
Are you going to be the data guru, the stats nerd?
Or are you going to trust your gut a little more?
Maybe a combination of both.
And here's a final question for you to ponder.
What's one upset that you're seriously considering right now?
And what's your reasoning behind it?
Is it based on data or is it just a hunch?
Think about it carefully.
And good luck with your brackets.
That's right. Good luck to everyone, and may your brackets be ever in your favor.
And may the best Cinderellas win.
Cheers to that.
Cheers.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into March Madness bracketology.
We hope you learned a thing or two.
And most importantly, we hope you have a blast watching the tournament.
It's going to be an exciting one.
We'll see you next time.
Take care.
Bye-bye.